Hello again. I'm back for more reading of Twisted Confessions by Bryan Bloom. And I'm going to continue starting with chapter 7. And I'm probably going to do 7, 8, and 9. And if there is an opportunity, either during or after I've finished reading, to bridge the fictional world of this murder mystery into a non-fictional reality world, I will. Otherwise, I'll let you know at the end, one way or the other. All right, so here we go. Chapter 7, Wednesday, November 9th, 2022, 9:30 a.m. Chris had been waking up early since he was in boot camp for the Marine Corps. Sound of a sergeant instructing barking in his ear at 0400 for 13 straight weeks was enough to transform him into a dedicated morning person for life. His ability to wake long before everyone else had often served as a positive, allowing him to get ahead in life. However, it also had its downfalls. While it was only 9:30 a.m., he had been up for 5 hours. Unfortunately, many of the people he needed to get in touch with for the murder case didn't start their days until much later. Rizzo's restaurant was one of the establishments that he had to get in touch with for verification. It was simple due diligence. Considering Jane's colleagues had already confirmed that she ordered takeout from the restaurant frequently, and she was friendly with the delivery drivers, often giving them notable tips, Chris had already decided that at this point in the game, it was very unlikely that a Rizzo's delivery driver had motive to kill a college dean. But he would cross the restaurant off his list and move on. His time in the military taught him that checklists were the only method to accomplishing anything, and he had to run a line through Rizzo's before he could move on to more important things in the case. With the receipt in his hand, he dialed the restaurant, hoping to get in touch with another early riser. He wasn't familiar with the restaurant industry, but surely someone had to get there a couple hours early, get things ready before they opened for lunch. Rizzo's, a voice picked up after 4 rings, quick as he had a line of customers, as if he had a line of customers. Hi, this is Detective Whittier from the Twisted Straits Police Department. I have a question about a delivery this past weekend. Die? The voice came across the line, clipped and aggravated. It wasn't the normal response Chris got when he stated his name and rank. What's your question? Can I speak to the owner? The man let out a loud chuckle. This is as close as you're going to get for now. I'm the manager. Okay, manager, what's your name? Vinny Milano. Can you verify that driver number 8 was working between the hours of 6 and 11 p.m. on Saturday night? The restaurant closed at 11 p.m., and according to the card reader on campus, Jane swiped into the building at 6:30 p.m. An odd time to go into work, but Chris couldn't pass judgment on the workaholics of the world. He was one and proved just how diehard he was about his job last night, staying up until 1 a.m., Googling Jane Lawrence and every other faculty member at the college. The styrofoam container of food had the fork in it, and 2 bites were taken, but it was as cold as if it had been sitting in the refrigerator all night. The driver had to have been there sometime after Jane swiped in and before the restaurant closed. Hold on. The sound of a landline being dropped onto a table landed in Chris's ear, followed by some shuffling and clinking. A solid 3 minutes later, Vinny came back on the phone. Yep, driver number 8, Goose, was working that night. Goose? Chris looked down at the receipt that had been attached to the tag out bag. The number 8 was printed beside the time of the delivery, 10:42. But who was Goose? Yeah, that's the call sign of the driver. Call sign? Chris didn't know if he should laugh or sink further into confusion. Yeah, all of our drivers go by call signs, nicknames. Okay, can you tell me if Goose is a male or a female? Goose is our only female driver. She takes her job seriously, too. Best driver we have, if you can believe it. Vinny said the words matter of factly. Can you connect me to Goose? Chris caught himself using the call sign. Actually, can you provide her real name? Sure, but I may have to kill you. The sense of humor sliced through Vinny's rough voice. His comedic timing was awful, but Chris went along with it to get what he needed. Good one. Her name is Liz Benton. After Chris got the correct spelling of the name and the phone number, he jotted it down on a piece of paper he found in his glove compartment. I presume she won't have any issue speaking with me. Liz would be happy to speak with you, I'm sure, but I'm guessing you won't have much luck getting in touch with her over the next couple of days. She started shutting her phone off when she's off work, something about clearing her mind and compartmentalizing her life to gain more balance. She's into this whole new age hippie thing. So, what happens if you need to get in touch with her for an emergency? The only emergency we have around here is when we're a driver or two short, but she made it clear she doesn't want to be called in. Do you have her address? That I can give you, but beware. If you catch her in the middle of a meditation, she'll chop your head off. Trust me, I've experienced it before. It's not pretty. Thanks for the warning. Chris tried not to laugh. This guy wasn't presenting a great case for his best employee. No problem. The address is 44 Blueberry Road. Take a right where the Kroger used to be, and you'll be on her road. Top of the hill, White House, blue door. The locals in this town were always eager to go above and beyond with their passing of information. As predicted, Vinny Milano was accurate in his description of Liz's address. Chris turned at the corner where the old Kroger used to be. Since then, it's been transformed into condos and a preschool. A dozen kids dotted around the fenced-in yard that used to be home to the parking lot of the grocery store. Stocky toddlers, bundled up in wintry gear, wobbled around a section of land that is lined with fake green grass. The other side of the area filled with sand and marked with fluorescent pails and beach molds. Chris watched as a teacher yelled at one kid while pushing another on a swing that was attached to the playhouse. Having an upbringing that was marked by hand-me-downs, food stamps, and zero funds for toys or entertainment, Chris had always imagined he'd be a responsible father, one who saved and held a steady job. His own father was so busy dreaming up his next business plan, taking loans out that weren't backed by a solid work ethic, he wanted to do things differently. And that is why he jumped on the opportunity to put everything he could into a 403B plan with the city and a tax deferred IRA plan as soon as he got his job as a police officer in Twisted Straits. Since then, he had hopped the ranks and was making and saving far more money than his father ever did for the future. He would be in good shape when it came time to retire. 44 Blueberry Lane was at the top of the street, as Vinny promised. Liz evidently had taken her hilltop location seriously and had the front yard decorated to the nines. Decor left over from Halloween was sprinkled in the front yard. A few softened pumpkins dotted the pathway that led to the front door, lost in the overgrown grass. Chris parked in the empty driveway and sauntered along the edge of the road, pushing through the half-open gate. Scarecrows with happy faces stuck unevenly in random patches of dirt scattered in the small front yard. Goblins and ghouls hung from a row of overgrown evergreens that blocked half of the front windows of the house. Liz took the holiday seriously. At first glance, Chris had trouble determining whether or not the small graveyard in the corner of the yard was real or fake. In two long steps, he was standing in front of the graves, crooked slabs of wood nailed together in the shape of a cross, with what appeared to be pet names written out in black permanent marker. Fluffy, 2007 to 2020. Baxter, 2008 to 2017. Dexter, 2008 to 2020. And Spot, 2011 to November 2022. A chill ran up Chris's spine as he saw fresh dirt in front of Spot's grave, an actual pet cemetery. He looked around the rest of the yard, taking in the faces of witches, goblins, and ghouls. Liz Benton was either obsessed with Halloween or she was determined to bring her past pets back to life. Chris remembered when he went to see the movie Pet Cemetery as a kid. At 9 years old, it was frightening, but it was one of the last memories he had of his mom before cancer took her away. He took a step backward, and just as he felt his foot make contact with something hard and uneven, the sound of screams and eerie laughter penetrated the air, sending the shiver further up his spine and heating his insides. He jumped back and saw an anim- animatronic hand reaching for his shin. Geez, he shouted, jumping back from the outstretched, wrinkly green hand. By the time he reached the front door, he felt as if he had walked through a haunted house. Liz's interests certainly weren't doing much for her alibi. If the girl was this obsessed with death, maybe she was guilty with the murder of the dean. With no doorbell in sight, Chris knocked 3 times, while trying his best to avoid eye contact with Michael Myers' mask that was hung from the front door. He dodged the mask's eye holes and pushed an evergreen branch out of the way so he could peek in the front windows. From what he could tell, the interior of the home looked unkept, lit up only by a tall lamp that spilled a circle of light in the dining area of the kitchen. Spread across the high top bar table for two was a half empty bowl of cereal and a coffee mug. Chris knocked again. With no car in the driveway, he had a bad feeling that Liz left on a whim. Vinny evidently knew his best employee well. Liz Benton wasn't answering her phone. The image that the restaurant manager painted of a girl contrasted heavily with the one that Chris achieved when he showed up at her home. He called Vinny after he left the haunted house and confirmed her days off, making sure to ask if she had mentioned anything about leaving town on her off days. Vinny didn't remember anything, but made it clear that she was a hard worker and was certainly involved in getting reconnected with her metaphysical side. Apparently, part of that involved getting reconnected with her past pets. Vinny was unaware of any family members who would know about her whereabouts, and he said that she was kind of a lone wolf. He also made it clear that he didn't get involved in the personal business of the employees. Liz worked hard, but did her own thing on her time off, rarely, if ever, acting chummy with the other Rizzo employees. Vinny promised to call Chris if he remembered anything off center about the girl, and in the meantime, they'd both keep trying to get in touch with her. Eventually, Chris would have to produce a warrant to enter the girl's home. Until then, he had other things to deal with. Wednesday, 10 a.m. Ross heard Steve Eilson's voice on the other end of the line for the fourth time in the last hour. The accounting department wasn't picking up its phone, and it was starting to become worrisome. Stephen had always been dedicated to the job, never missing a late night call or department celebration. He was at a he was as tied to the profession as Jane was, which caused a whole other set of worries to infiltrate Ross's mind. What if the killer was actually a serial killer and Stephen was the next victim? From what Ross had gathered so far, there was no real motive involved. Maybe the killer simply decided to target college deans. If that was the case, Steve Eilson could very well be the next victim, and Ross had every right to be worried that he wasn't answering his phone. As the closest faculty member to Jane in the finance department, Chancellor Alfred Bates gave Ross custody of a box of Jane's belongings after Detective Whittier had his chance to look through them for evidence. Mostly work stuff, files stuff files stuffed with paperwork on students, future plans of the department, and a pack of miscellaneous pamphlets that Jane had collected as a number of different events over the years. With the campus still shut down, Ross planned on dedicating the day to doing a little detective work of his own. His first stop would be his inbox. He melted into the brown leather chair that greeted the large mahogany desk he and Samantha shared when they had to tend to business after hours. For Ross, this was a sanctuary for grading papers, and for Samantha, it served as a creative haven, a place where he could bring life to the logos and signs that clients hired her to develop and design. It was time to go through Jane's box of work belongings. He'd have to push past the pull of pain that he felt when he thought about how her fingertips had grazed these items just days before. He'd start with a pile of pamphlets, saving the personal items for later. Why did she even keep these? He asked the question aloud to himself as he peeled off the rubber band and watched the colorful folded sheets fan out before him. A blue and yellow one from a conference at another Midwest college. He remembered how they had scheduled the trip so they could pick the brains of the professors and the dean of the robust finance program. He smiled when he thought about how Jane had been so complimentary to the dean. She never hesitated to express appreciation when it was due, and that was one of the traits he loved most about his friend. Never jealous and always honest, dedicated to bettering her school's program for the benefit of future students. It was admirable. Memories flittered around in his mind with each pamphlet that passed his index finger, until he came to an abrupt stop, face to face with Terry Tyson's cheesy grin. Despite himself, he opened up the pamphlet, curious about which of his events Jane had attended in the past. He unfolded the accordion-like sheet that was marked by Terry's top tips for finance. The faster you pay off your mortgage, the more successful you will be. Eliminate debt before investing. Another pamphlet showcasing Terry Tyson's baby steps for paying off debt and funding for the future. On a white glossy background, the steps were listed out in deep green, promising to bring anyone success regardless of how much money they made. In bold print at the bottom of the pamphlet, it said, "Trust me, everyone has become a millionaire by following these steps. Number one, save 1,000 for a beginner emergency fund. Two, with the exception of the mortgage, pay off all debt. Three, add to your emergency fund and keep saving until you have 3 to 6 months of expenses accumulated. Number four, dedicate 15% of your income to your retirement investments. Five, put some money away for your child's college fund. Six, pay off your mortgage only." Okay, I want to stop here and I'm going to go back to the chapter before where Chris, the detective, was talking about how his father was always, looking at different investment opportunities, rarely ever saved. It suggests that he didn't make great opportunity decisions. And Chris was determined to kind of follow the new conventional wisdom, which was to save in your retirement plan, the 403B, to continue to pay and save more into your savings plan as your income increases. And then I want to go to this chapter in this section I just finished reading where Terry Tyson. So Terry Tyson is a reflection of a real person that Bryan Bloom is writing about. And he has what is called the 7 baby steps to get to, sort of financial freedom. In this reality TV, radio, YouTube kind of financial personality. He also doesn't have to be registered as a financial advisor, licensed, what have you. And he's giving advice to millions of people, including he's made millions of dollars. An interesting side note here is in August of 2022, I decided to write an ebook, which is on my website. I've also, in this podcast, had a third-party artificial intelligence actually do a review of my ebook. And my ebook is based off of a video that this financial personality, entertainer, had put up on YouTube, and I took notes and I saw the conflicts, the talking out both sides of his mouth, and I reference him straight up by name in my book because it's a, you know, it's not fictional, it's nonfiction. And shortly thereafter, I reached out to Bryan Bloom. I have a bit of a relationship with Bryan, and I was talking to him about some of what he talks about in the Confessions of a CPA, and I was thinking about um, hiring somebody to program a calculator for me, and I wanted to see what his thoughts were on that, if he was okay with that. And he said, "Well, I'm doing some of that for another software company." And so then that just led to me saying, "Well, I'm not going to do that. Then I won't, create the same thing that you're creating." But then I said, "Hey, are you writing any new books?" And he said, "Well, not any non-fictional, but I'm doing my first fictional book, and it was Twisted Confessions, right?" So uh, he said, "So I can give you a little hint, uh, and so he gave me a little backdrop of the story, and I was quite amazed that we were both on the same page, and that we were basically trying to show the error of the ways of this financial entertainer. And that's, sort of where we uh, will continue here. So I'm going to continue to read. "Only when you no longer owe money can you invest it." That is this advice from Terry Tyson. These were the extreme statements that Ross knew a licensed individual would never be allowed to make, right? Because he's a personality, he's an entertainer, he's not subject to the regulations that people like myself are, and Bryan Bloom, and so many are, where we can't just be touting off stuff as advice when, you know we could end up getting caught in some trouble. But um, we're able to just sit back and watch somebody that's not licensed, that's not regulated, make millions of dollars while giving oftentimes some bad advice. It's not all bad advice, but he's bought and paid for by the mutual fund industry, by the financial advisors who buy his leads that he's creating based off of his YouTube channel and all his radio shows across the country and that type of thing. So, again, only when you no longer owe money can you invest it. And that's not true. That's, first of all, not true. These were the extreme statements that Ross knew a licensed individual would never be allowed to make, especially that guarantee about becoming a millionaire. A licensed person also wouldn't be able to use the word only when making suggestions for when to start investing. He let out a dramatic sigh. He couldn't get the pamphlet out of his hands fast enough, and he turned it face down on the desk, ready to move on and forget about Terry Tyson's beliefs and his smug grin. Moving on, he flipped through a few more sheets of paper. Making two piles, he mentally categorized them as important and unimportant. Eventually, when he was ready, he would throw away the unimportant documents, clearing up space in the office that would eventually be taken over by another dean. One document was a handwritten note from him to Jane, dating back to just a couple of weeks ago prior, when he left her a reminder to look over some of the curriculum documents. He held the sheet in both hands, wishing he could bring her back. A tear rolled down his cheek and landed on the blue ink that he had scrawled. He watched it as the ink spread across the personalized paper. A note from Ross. If she was still alive, he would likely be bugging her about addressing this note so he could present the winter curriculum to his students, with some added practical theories that they had agreed would serve as beneficial to the students earning finance degrees. Contrarian practical viewpoints from guest speakers like the author Tarek Williams, who spoke to a group of students in the past. He thought about all the times he tried to push for curriculum changes and how they playfully butted heads. Jane wanted to follow the rules and follow the traditional teachings that the school had followed for decades, and so did he. But he thought there was no harm in changing it up a bit, providing the students with another way. Ross gently laid the note on the desk in front of him, taking it in one last time before deciding that it belonged in the discard pile. Moving on, he flipped through the remaining documents. One with fancy font showcased several ways of saving for the future by thinking outside the box, all in bold print and underlined in red. And that's what I'm about. Is is there some other way to do things thinking outside the box? Ross laughed out loud, thinking this was probably one of the many documents he'd given Jane to defend his case on the curriculum. It was even framed in images of red dollar bills. He silently scolded himself for being so pushy as he dissected the other items in the box, many of which had Terry Tyson's pompous grin on the front. Ross knew that Jane's traditional teaching supported what Terry Tyson preached to his fan club, and that she was a stickler for following the traditional ways of teaching finance to students. While Ross's views were in line with Tyson's and Jane's, every now and then he'd find himself digging deeper into financial saving strategies, and on those rare occasions his mind would expand like a balloon being filled with helium. He was guilty of bouncing back and forth over the years, and if he was being honest with himself, he had to learn the hard way on more than one occasion. A side note, like many of us do, including myself. Not only has he gone back and forth with refinancing his home, but he'd been caught up in the trap of paying extra money on the mortgage. Not a good idea. And that's my side note. Following Terry's strict advice on paying off all debt. After those bigger payments, he found himself needing that extra money months later when an unexpected home plumbing problem arose. The aggravation enveloped him when he thought about how he ended up having to put that project on a credit card with 18% interest, far higher than his mortgage interest rate. Had he only saved that cash instead of paying more on his mortgage, he would have avoided the 18% being stripped from his wallet for no reason other than listening to Terry's advice. That was one of the many arguments he and Samantha got into. Why are you in such a rush to pay off debt? Aren't we in this house to make memories, not use it as a one-way bank? Ross asked. What do you mean a one-way bank? She countered. One way meaning they freely take our extra money but force us to beg for the money back if we want it. They make us give reasons if we want to get it back. On top of that, they only give it back if we borrow it. We are forced to borrow our own money. This is what I mean by a one-way bank. Their way or no way. And on they would go. One of his biggest discoveries came when he found himself immersed in a book he had happened to find in one of those free little libraries. The library was essentially a wooden box painted like a brick house, mimicking some of the historical homes in town, placed in what was deemed by the locals as the town center. The free little library had a lot of traffic, and Ross initially started frequenting it when Alyssa and Annabelle were younger. With shrieks of delight, the girls used to love standing on the rock in front of their little structure and sliding the lock open, their faces lighting up with wonder as they sorted through the single line of books till they found one that was age appropriate. For old time's sake, Ross had decided to open the little brick house and peruse until his fingertips landed on a book cover with a hand holding an open paperback topped with a graduation cap. Bold print boasted the brave title, Confessions of a CPA, Why What I Was Taught to Be True Has Turned Out Not to Be. It was initially the cover that caught his attention. Samantha, Samantha later teased him for being a finance teacher who was drawn to a book with an open book on the cover. Sometimes he regretted ever opening that book, as it essentially took his entire belief system about what he taught and shook it up like a can of soda. The realizations he learned in just the first chapter alone made his mind all fizzy about what he was teaching and what he really believed. He had always agreed with buying things in cash, and he had been a drill instructor when it came to making purchases with Samantha. In fact, she actually started calling him Sergeant Jackson when they decided to buy a new car, or even something more minor like a sofa. If they had been out shopping and came across the perfect dining room table after hunting for the right one for years, cash was the only way Ross would allow them to purchase it. Samantha was a smart woman, and she played the role of captain in many areas of their relationship. So she was usually fine letting Ross lead the ship when it came to their finances. This book, however, had taught him that when you pay cash, you don't get interest. And not getting interest is the same as paying interest. If you use the cash that you saved up to buy a car or a sofa, it's still costing you interest that you could have gained had you left that money in the bank. Interest you will never get for the rest of your life. Now, here's where he's crossing over into the reality of the world and the way people are getting advice and how it actually is not correct. Every purchase was really a purchase to buy and a decision how to buy. Every purchase was a financing decision. You either pay with your money and not earn interest any longer on that money, or you use someone else's money and pay them interest. Either way, it costs money to spend money. It took a while for Ross to wrap his head around some of the practical principles discussed in the book, since he had spent his lifetime being told that debt was bad. From his own parents to the billboards that lined the interstates, debt was viewed as something you should not be in. When Ross really thought about it, he realized that paying cash was essentially like borrowing from your future. You end up being without the cash and the interest that it could have earned by the time you approach retirement. As these new lessons lined up in his head, he was struck by a disturbing thought. How much did Samantha's engagement ring really take away from his retirement years? And just as quickly as he adopted the speculation, he dismissed it. Samantha was definitely worth it. In a similar way, Ross also had been second guessing that no brainer of free money when the car dealership offers a 0% loan, or the furniture store gives you 4 years, same as cash, as a way to purchase. Ross learned that a 0% car loan was never really 0% because it's a choice between a 0% loan or cash back. And cash back is simply a reduction in the car price. If you take 0% loan, you are financing 30,000. If you take the cash back, car's price is actually 27,000 if the cash back is 3,000. The cash back merely reflects the prepaid interest on the 0% loan. Ross had tried multiple times to find the flaw in what this book was telling him, but it was all simple math. He reworked the same calculation over and over again, and it turned out that a 0% car loan is really a 5.5% loan over 48 months. The book used another equation to showcase the wrong assumptions we make when we follow Terry Tyson's way of thinking in the traditional way he taught. If you had 1,000 and earned an average rate of return of 20% over 2 years, then the result would be 1,440. or it would be 1,280, as the book suggested. Ross thought about the equation. Since he had picked up the book, he couldn't quite figure it out. I want to stop here for a moment and make a comment. So if you had $1,000, well, and he's saying you got an average rate of return of 20% over 2 years, then of course you're looking at the first year, you're going to have $1,200 with that 20% return. And then you get 20% return on top of the 1,200. And then it would suggest it would be 1,440. Or would it be 1,280? Because in fact, even though you might be able to get an average of 20%, something like uh, let's take you got 30% one year and you got 10% the next year. I don't know exactly because I haven't done the math on this one, but if you add those 2 years together, you have 40% divided by two, which is 20% average. But if you did the equation, and I can try to do it quick in my head. If you got 30% the first year, you'd have $1,300. And then if you got another 10% on top of that, you get 1,300 on top of that, which would be 1,430. He probably used other math, but that is actually less, even though the average is the same. If I just did that correctly, I went from 1,300. I got another 130. Sorry, and that would give me 1,430 instead of the 1,440. Not a big difference, but over time, with them talking about averages, for example, in the market, the world doesn't work in averages. So I continue. The book brought it with a wake-up call, and he took what he learned to Jane, but she immediately shook her head no, telling him that the principles he taught are the principles that have been taught to the university for many, many years. We are not going to change these universally accepted principles, whether you can they prove that they work or not. Her voice echoed in his head. This was one of the 3 times that he attempted to get her to at least let him seep in a little bit of the practical teaches into the classroom, and one of the 3 things that he got shot down. While he and Steve Eilson didn't often cross paths, they did have a deep discussion about the differences when it came to the practical way of thinking versus the traditional way they taught in the classroom. He and Stephen agreed when it came to being open-minded, but they were still firm believers in promoting traditional teachings in the classroom, partly because their livelihood was dependent on teaching the way that they were directed. Conflict of interest is my side note on that. Even though they think that maybe there's a better way of doing things, they're going to go with the traditional because, that's their livelihood. So they got to keep touting the same advice. As university faculty members, they were required to submit ethical statements every year. Ross wouldn't dare annotate on the annual statement that he had started to adopt new beliefs, ones that opposed what was designated on the curriculum he taught. His career was on the line. As Ross continued to scroll through emails, a notification bubble appeared on the upper right side of his screen. Confirm attendance for young professional seminar. The notification must have been popping up all week, but he hadn't noticed because he had a tendency to X out all of the alerts without even looking at them. But now he stared at the notification, hugged by sadness. He had planned on attending the young professional cocktail hour in Springfield with Jane, and while social gatherings weren't his cup of tea, he had been looking forward to spending time chatting about the future of the department, hopefully celebrating a rise in high school students interested in the field. Stephen, he said, the word out loud, as if summoning his colleague's presence. Did he ever respond to the invite? Ross scrolled back up to received messages, typing Stephen's email address in the front line. Driving the mouse with his index finger, he clicked on the last email from Stephen. It must have been an accidental reply all, because Stephen responded with thank you, Chancellor Bates, to a faculty-wide email that was sent on November 1st. That was the last email he received from Stephen, so he never responded about the young professional events, unless, of course, he only replied to Jane. I'm going to stop there. I was going to read maybe 3 chapters, but I'm going to stop there. So that's what he's trying to lead us to understand in this fictional story, is that people are getting advice, and that is part of this whole story in the murder mystery. Um, and I won't spoil it. It's like any murder mystery. Sometimes you think from watching a show or a movie, you think you know who it's going to be because of the way that the writing is done and the way that they position things. And I can tell you, you're going to be surprised at who it is. It's not going to be so obvious as they usually are not, but it's fun to go along with the process, and hope you're enjoying the reading even while I stumble. So hope you have a great day.